Modern English is full of irregular grammatical rules, such as s, the third person singular. Why do they still exist? Don't forget to subscribe to Lang Explorer to show your support. English grammar has many weird rules, and we don't know why they exist. For example, in the present tense, s is added only in the third person singular. There are many irregular verbs, some nouns have irregular plurals, some adverbs are placed before the verb, and so on. In fact, such rules are witnesses and remnants of what the English language has gone through during its history, and you'll understand better why they exist when you compare them with other Germanic languages such as German. Let's have a look at why such odd grammatical norms are still preserved in modern English. Remembering carefully the English grammar, it isn't uncommon to wonder why such rules are in place. For example, it would be easier to write right for right just as it's pronounced, and there's no difficulty in understanding the third person singular present tense without the s. Furthermore, English has many irregular verbs, and there would be no difficulty in understand if all of them were to be conjugated regularly. For example, nobody would misunderstand if the past tense and past participle of the verb write were righted. Nevertheless, we can explain why such irregularities are found in spelling and grammar by reviewing the history of English back to Old English. This time we'll focus on such strange aspects in the modern English, while we recommend you to watch other videos on Old English between the 5th and 11th century and Middle English from the 11th to 15th century. First of all, let's have a look at the fact that the pronunciation of English words is quite far from their spelling, splitting the topic between consonants and vowels. Some consonants, such as gh in right, k in knee, and w in right, were pronounced in the Middle Ages when spelling was more or less formulated, and they remain in the same manner when they are no longer pronounced. In fact, for example, the German equivalent of the English word right is recht, and the German equivalent of knee is Knie. Another word of Latin origin that was cognate with right is direct, but as you know, the C corresponding to the English GH is pronounced, indicating that the pronunciation has disappeared only in English. The reason why English vowels aren't pronounced as spelled is mainly due to the great vowel shift which took place between the 15th and 17th centuries. Before that, English vowels were pronounced basically as they were spelled, but this triggered changes such as a to a in make and e to I in time, among others. However, publishers at that time basically continued to use the same spelling as it was in earlier times, which led to a discrepancy between spelling and pronunciation. Another difference took place also between American and British English, so it's necessary to become familiar with both pronunciations if one really wanted to master the English language. Another oddness in English is the s in the third person singular present. Actually, this s is unnecessary in terms of communication. For example, the phrase, "He speak French very well," can be perfectly understood although it's grammatically incorrect. In fact, the verb has no ending in the third person singular present in sentences using auxiliary verbs such as can and will, and in Nordic languages such as Swedish and Danish, verbs are conjugated only in the tense but not in the person or singular or plural, without interfering the understanding. So why do we need to add s for the third person singular present? The reason for this is more historical than logical. Initially, English had a much more complex verb conjugation than we have today, and in Old English, the present tense was conjugated in 4 forms: first, second, and third person singular and plural. Of these conjugations, the first person singular and plural were weakened and finally became the same as the infinitive, leaving only the second and third person singular with their own conjugation suffix. English used to have 2 pronouns for second person, thou for singular and you for plural, but since the plural, you, was also used for the singular, the conjugation for thou ceased to be used, and as a result, only the singular third person remained. The ending of the third person singular was originally th, but it was replaced by the dialectal s. Watch this video to learn more about the history of the second person in English. Remnants of the more complex verb conjugation system that once existed in English are still present in modern English. For example, in the subjunctive present, the infinitive or should plus the infinitive is used, and in the subjunctive past, were is used in the first or third person singular, which is a remnant of a more complex conjugation system in the past. People tend to think that English verbs have only 3 conjugations, present, past, and past participle, but actually, English has more tenses and conjugations which happen to be identical to other tenses, and such a system is more evident if you see conjugations of subjunctives in Old English, Middle English, and German. Those who have studied German, French, Spanish, or another European language will understand this concept much better. Another tricky part of the English grammar is the number of irregular verbs. As we discussed earlier, English has only 3 conjugated forms, present, past, and past participle, but there are quite a few irregular verbs that need to be memorized. Some verbs express different tenses by changing vowels, such as begin, began, and begun. Some of these roots can be traced back to the Proto-Indo-European, spoken more than 5,000 years ago. As time has passed, more and more irregular verbs have become regular, but there are still a significant number of irregular verbs in modern English that need to be learned properly. In addition, there is an unusual rule in English called inversion. English word order usually begins with a subject and verb, followed by an object or complement, but some words, such as so, neither, nor, can come before the subject. Initially, in Indo-European languages, verbs usually come at the end of a sentence, and such word order was common in Sanskrit and Latin. In Germanic languages, however, the V2 word order, in which the verb basically comes second, has taken root, with the topic first, followed by the verb, which doesn't have to be the subject, but can be an object, a complement, or any other adverb. Thus, in German, for example, you can begin with the item you want to emphasize. For example, the sentence "I go to the library today with her" can be written in various ways, depending on which of these elements you want to emphasize. English inversion is a remnant of this old-fashioned V2 word order, which is still possible with some adverbs. Some English nouns have irregular plurals with vowel change, such as man men, woman women, foot feet, tooth teeth, and mouse mice. As with the V2 word order, this is due to another feature typical of the Germanic languages, namely umlaut, which means that accented vowels change from a to e, from o to u, and from u to u, when the syllable following the accented one is I. In German, this phenomenon occurs in nouns, verbs, and adjectives, and these changes should be familiar to anyone who has studied this language. Specifically, nouns such as
Vater, Ball, Vogel, Sohn, Mutter, Haus
change their vowels to
Väter, Bälle, Vögel, Söhne, Mütter, Häuser
in the plural, and verbs change their vowels for second and third person singular indicative. Such as the verb
fahren
changes into
fährst, fährt,
and in the subjunctive past this umlaut always occurs when the accented vowel is a, o, or u. In the case of adjectives, umlaut occurs for comparatives or superlatives, for instance,
alt, groß, jung,
change into
älter, größer, jünger.
English, too, still retains some of this umlaut influence, which is reflected in irregular plurals that we've already seen. Another characteristic of English compared to other European languages is the use of the auxiliary verb, do, when making negative and interrogative sentences with general verbs. In German,
nicht
is placed after the verb, and in French, the verb is sandwiched with
ne
and
pas.
But in English, the negative form of the auxiliary verb do, namely don't, doesn't, and didn't, is placed before the verb. Regarding the interrogative, in French, the word order is the same as in a normal sentence, especially in casual conversation. In German, it's enough to change the word order and start the sentence with the verb, but in English, it's necessary to start the sentence with an auxiliary verb, do, does, or did. This required use of auxiliary verbs is a feature not found in other European languages. So we've seen quite a few grammatical rules in English that aren't too logical, but they remain mainly because they're old traditions, and it'll sound odd to native speakers to eliminate all of them. For instance, if frequently used irregular verbs such as make, think and go were treated as regular verbs and conjugated as maked, thinked and goed, the meaning would be certainly understood, but it would sound very strange to native speakers. It's therefore important to master this kind of English grammar, although it may be a bit tedious. Now, let's summarize what we've learned today. 1. English was basically pronounced as spelled in the late Middle Ages, but later some consonants became silent and the pronunciation of vowels changed dramatically due to the Great Vowel Shift, while spelling remained basically intact, resulting in a discrepancy between spelling and pronunciation. 2. The S in the third-person singular present is a remnant of the more complex conjugation system of the past, although its absence would not cause any problems in communication. 3. English still retains subjunctive present and past, while the lack of its own conjugation makes us unaware of their existence. 4. English also has a large number of irregular verbs, some of which can be traced back to the Proto-Indo-European language more than 5,000 years ago. 5. The inversion, in which some adverbs are placed before the subject, is a remnant of the V2 word order common in Germanic languages. 6. Umlaut, changing vowels in plural and so on, is another remnant of Germanic languages. 7. Another characteristic of English is the use of the auxiliary verb, do, in negative and interrogative sentences. 8. Although these grammatical rules seem illogical at first glance, they've remained for historical reasons. If they were rearranged, on the contrary, they would sound unnatural to native speakers. Thank you for watching this video. We're looking forward to seeing you in the next one.